Okay, so in this lecture, I am going to go over the market society. So if you feel free to press pause and take a look at these cartoons and see if you can figure out how it relates to this week's material. All right, so for the first part, we're going to go over free markets and neoliberal economics. So you can go ahead and read these questions, and these are among the things that we'll answer in this discussion today. And I did want to issue a disclaimer here. Honestly, this applies pretty much for the whole class, but economics is a humongous topic. People spend their whole lives studying it, getting advanced degrees in it, applying it, etc. So we are really only scratching the surface. I mean, this happens with most of the content of this course, but with economics in particular, this is a humongous field. So I just want to provide that disclaimer. We're just going over a very brief overview, but some important concepts in terms of sustainability. And in this section, we will discuss some of the theories of these three gentlemen that you see here: Adam Smith, Julian Simon, Milton Friedman. Okay, so first I want to go over the theory of the invisible hand. This image that you may be able to see on your left, this is the snapshot of the cover page of a book, full titled An Inquiry into the Nature and Causes of the Wealth of Nations. It's most commonly and almost always referred to as The Wealth of Nations. It was written by Adam Smith in 1776. Easy date to remember for Americans. And so this book is really important in economics. It is commonly referred to as sort of the beginning of our modern economic system. So the theories, some of the theories that he put forth in this book are a very strong contributor to how we run our current economic system. Okay, and so it also coincides pretty closely with the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, and some of the things that he discussed in this book are also very much contributed to the Industrial Revolution. So the wealth of nations is an important concept. Okay, so the first thing I want to go over is the term the invisible hand. He did have a video on this, but Smith in his book describes the visible hand, basically stating that it's a metaphor. Okay, so he didn't really believe there was an invisible hand. It's a metaphor for how in a free market economy, by acting in your own self-interest, you will actually do better things for society than if you try to help society at large. Okay, and as this is a quote from the book, by pursuing his own interest, he frequently promotes that of society more effectually than when he actually intends to promote it. It's as if he's led by this invisible hand. And so the belief here, to be clear, Adam Smith states that if you're operating in an economy and you're acting in your own self-interest, you actually will more positively impact society than if you tried to actually positively impact society. And it may sound counterintuitive. It actually does work to an extent. This is sort of the theory, the fundamental theory behind free markets is that we just have to make our own, our economic decisions based on what's best for us, and it overall benefits society as a whole. A lot of people adhere to this notion today. And some with good reason. There are probably limits to this. But anyway, that's the important thing here is that this is what is referred to as the invisible hand. So if you ask an economist or someone that studied economics, they'll know what you mean when you say invisible hand. Now, to be clear, and it's important to put in here that even though Adam Smith is most often pointed to as a very, very strong proponent of just having free markets, very little or no government intervention, he was very concerned about some of the impacts of some of the theories that he put forth, including, he proposed this division of labor, the sort of mass production, as a way to actually increase economic output. But he, just as an example of that, he was very concerned that by dividing labor uh, in that people would become, basically they sort of lose their own humanity. And he was also very concerned about if you let free markets operate for too long, that inequality will occur and that it can cause a lot of problems. So just to be clear, Adam Smith, invisible hand is a very important concept that he came up with, but there were even some concerns when he wrote this book. Okay, so that leads us into, excuse me, a discussion of neoliberal economics. So first of all, what is meant by a free market? So when we talk about a free market, we're really referring to free from government regulation. Okay, so governments should not intrude into market transactions. To be clear, they're not saying that we should have anarchy. We do need governments to enforce laws to make sure transactions are fair, but they don't want governments influencing markets other than making sure that people are making free and fair transactions. And that's closely related to the term neoliberal economics. Excuse me. So neoliberal economics, if you think of neoliberal, it means new. Okay, so neo meaning new and liberal meaning free. And so it's basically the same. It's the belief that government should play a limited role in economic transactions. Okay, so it's a belief in the free market. Neoliberal, it's new because it's sort of a newer wave, a more modern wave in the 20th century of what the original free market philosophies advocated for. Okay, so some key points. This is from Milton Friedman, and it's a video that you watched. And there's a ton of videos with Milton Friedman out there. This is one that I think kind of concisely provides his philosophy of his neoliberal philosophies. Now, Milton Friedman, to be clear, is a very prominent figure in neoliberal economics. He's in some ways seen as one of the sort of godfathers or grandfathers, whatever you want to put it, of neoliberal economics. And so he's a very, very, very important figure in neoliberal economics. Okay, and so his key points. And actually take a quick step back. If you watch the video, you notice that Friedman, as you'll see, there's reasons to be critical of some of the things that he says, but and you probably noticed this in the video, his goal really, his intentions were very, very good. He was a very strong advocate for eliminating poverty. He truly believed in the freedom of people to make decisions, and he, by all accounts, was a very good, thoughtful person that really wanted what's best for society. So his theories, again, they are used today, and they're very important for modern economics. So if I seem a little bit critical of him, he did a lot of good things and his intentions were good. Maybe some of his theories don't work out as well when you look at it from a sustainability perspective. Okay, so some key points from this short video that you saw of him. And so he lays it right out at the beginning, saying the free enterprise system, which is the free market system, is the best way to fight poverty. Okay, so this is about poverty. So he says and this is a dated video, so keep in mind this was I don't know if this is the 60s or 70s, but it was at the time inner cities and particularly minority populations and particularly black populations. Poverty was a huge, huge problem. There was a lot of urban blight, and it was a big deal. And so that's the focus of this. So what he refers to as unemployment of black communities, you can think of as just low-income urban communities, regardless of race or color. And so he blames unemployment on bad government schools and minimum wage. These are both intrusions into the free market. Okay, and he says that they are undereducated because of bad government schools, and the minimum wage, as he says, basically what it forces companies to hire people with skills and not allow on-the-job training. So what he means by that is that if you don't have a minimum wage, think of it this way: if you have a high minimum wage, and you have people without good skills, then it's hard for a company to justify hiring that person because they have to pay them a lot of money. But if they don't have the skills, then it's not worth hiring them at that rate. And so what he's saying is that by raising the minimum wage or having a minimum wage, that it prevents people without skills from getting jobs because employers don't want to pay to train them on the job. And this argument is still used today. And to be honest, it does make sense to a degree. I don't know if any of you, when you first started your job in high school or whatever, didn't have many skills, you didn't know how to really have a job or hold down a job very well. And it's hard to justify from a business owner perspective paying people a high wage. Now, if everybody in the country, if the whole country has a high wage, then it's a little easier to justify because you basically don't have a choice, and that's the theory. And the minimum wage now is so low that even if you work full time at a minimum wage, you're making in the $20,000 a year range, which you can't do much with, especially if you're raising a family. So anyway, that's the philosophy behind it. And this is kind of a loop for him. Like, we have people that are poorly trained because of bad government schools, and because they're poorly trained, then companies don't want to hire them because they have to pay them a minimum wage. He also says welfare is what he calls a machine for producing poor people. Keep in mind that back then welfare was something you could basically remain on the welfare rolls indefinitely and just keep claiming welfare. Now, they were not living well. It still wasn't enough to live a good, healthy, happy life. Um, but now there's actually some work requirements of welfare, so it's a little bit different. The whole point here, I mean, there's a lot to debate on all sides of this, is that this is a kind of a good synopsis of the neoliberal thinking. Get the government out of the way. You know, we need to privatize schools. People should be able to pay employees no matter whatever they want. That welfare, that social safety nets are a bad thing. That's the government intruding on the market, and so forth. And so I want you to just some questions I want you to think about with his arguments. Excuse me, sorry, not the, as he says, it's the government's fault, not the people's fault. And that's, I think, important to point out, is that he's clear that he doesn't blame the people for this. So he doesn't blame the poor for this. He blames the government for setting them up poorly. And so anyway, some things maybe to think about. So what happens if you privatize schools, right? So if schools cost money, what does that mean for people that don't have money? Good thing to think about. What happens without minimum wage? Is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing? Is there maybe a middle road where if you're a dependent and you live in your your parents' house, or you live in somebody else's house, maybe there's a minimum wage for that as opposed to the head of a household? I don't know. There's some good questions to ask there. And what happens without welfare? Do you think it would influence people to work and get a job? What if they don't have training to get a job? Is it okay to just say you're on your own? You have to figure your way out, regardless of the school you went to, the resources you have, the barriers that you have. And so, again, this is an argument that is going on today. That's important to think about. Okay, on to Julian Simon. So there was a video from Julian Simon here. Again, Simon is one of those people, he's very much an advocate of free markets. He's not quite as famous as Milton Friedman. But if you notice from the video, and even from his Wikipedia picture here, he was, again, by all accounts, like a very positive person. He really wanted what was best for society. And his thing was, he was an economist, and he was all about looking at data, and there's a whole story behind this, but basically his premise was, I've looked at the data, I've looked at how people were doing a long time ago versus how they are now, and we're doing a lot better now, and he basically attributes that to being free markets. And so if he talked about life expectancy, and he said that for thousands of years, from the beginning of humanity, so however you want to, 150, 200,000 years ago, whatever, the average lifespan was about 30 years. Okay, so that's about how long you'd expect to live. And then the richest country in the world in 200 years ago, which was France at the time, the lifespan was still 30 years. Okay, but then in the span of 200 years, we went from 30 years to about 70 years and above in the wealthy countries. So in the span of history, 200 years is the blink of an eye, and he's saying, look, we spent thousands of years living short lives, and then in 200 years we went from 30 to 70 years. And he does know that these are for the rich countries, and that in 15 to 20 years, the poor countries, since World War II, also increased their lifespan by 15 to 20 years. And as he says, this is one of the best achievements in human history. And it's, as he says, despite population growth, we don't run out of copper or wheat or any other resources. And so this 200-year span is really important. If you think about what was happening 200 years ago, that was right around, more or less around the time, early Industrial Revolution and early beginnings of the free market system. So the corollary here is that he's saying that the fact that we're living a lot longer lives, this rapid increase in human life expectancy correlates really closely with the use of the free market system. And that's his point, is that the free market system we can sort of thank for this advancement. And again, to be clear, it's really hard to argue against the fact that the free market system has allowed us to live longer, that has provided things like medical technology, production of food, and so forth. And so, but that's his primary argument. Okay, so key phrase that he utters here is, the more that we use of natural resources, the more that we have of them. So this seems like an oxymoron. It seems completely counterintuitive, but here's how it works. Okay, so it's all about supply and demand and human ingenuity. And so as we use more resources, okay, so that means that demand goes up. So if the demand for something goes up, the price of it increases. That's just basic, very, very basic economics. As something gets in high demand, you can think of whatever the thing that's in high demand. As I narrate this, Bitcoin, the cryptocurrency was really in high demand, and the price just shot through the roof, right? So as the demand goes up, the price increases. So what happens when the price increases is that people see an opportunity to make money. And so when they want to make money, they do one of two things. Either they figure out how to make that thing more cheaply, or they find a substitute. Okay? And so this is human ingenuity. This is the market, an unfettered free market system. As something becomes scarce, the price goes up. When people want to make money, they either find a way to get it more cheaply or to find a substitute. And at the end of the process, we end up with quote unquote more of it. And when he means more available, he means it's cheaper to buy. Okay? And so this to him is the magic of the free market. When something becomes scarce, people find a way to either substitute for it or make more of it. And at the end of the day, it becomes cheaper. Okay? And so he says we need bigger and better problems, meaning the bigger and the worse the problem, the more human ingenuity kind of kicks in. Okay? And his view of population is that we need more people, actually, because it creates more problems and more solutions. The more people we have, the more we're able to solve these problems. And this is very typical of neoliberal economics. Okay, so just let the market decide, let prices send signals, and then the market as a whole will figure out the solution. So the question is, that it seems, I mean, you wonder, does this really work? As we use more and more of something, does that thing become cheaper? So let's look at a little bit of data. So this is a very busy chart, but this is these lines. Really what I want you to see is the general trend here. So this is the price of a bunch of important metals from 1967 to 2001. So we have aluminum, copper, lead, nickel, tin, and zinc, all very important metals. And basically, as you can see, the price, while going up for short periods of time, generally speaking, the trend is mostly down. It's flat or down. Okay, so these are very important metals. We use more and more and more of these every year as population grows, as industrial output grows. But over time, okay, there's a very rapid expansion in human population and so forth, the price does go down. If you look at the price of oil, now this is a snapshot from 92 to 2016. We could go further back, excuse me, but you notice that even though price does spike from time to time, okay, it spikes a little bit, but as I narrate this video in early 2018, the price actually has really leveled off and went down. And this happened because the demand for oil went up, the price spiked, and then we basically found a new way to get more oil. At this time, it was hydraulic fracturing or fracking, and other unconventional sources. So the whole point here is that even though these spikes can happen, it actually, this free market, as incentives come to the fore, we do tend to find new ways to produce the things that we need. And so the take home here for this part is that markets are very, very good at managing things that provide quick feedback. Okay, so when something becomes scarce and the price shoots up, the market is amazingly good at managing that. So if the price goes up, people are really incentivized to find more of it or substitute for it, and the price does tend to go down. Okay, so but in order for that to occur, we need very quick feedback. Okay, and also it's important to note that it's good at managing things that can be replenished or replaced, right? So with copper, for example, as we use more copper, we find a substitute for it. So back in the 80s, it was we started using fiber optics instead of copper for wiring and so forth. So if we can find a replacement for that source, again, the market's really good at finding replacements. And also, it should be noted that things that aren't necessarily essential, like if we run out of copper, I mean, it's not good, but humans don't need copper to survive in the quantities that we use it. Okay, so that's a really important take-home. Markets are phenomenal at managing things that it can sort of see and get feedback on. But there's a few caveats here. So if you look at, this is a chart of carbon dioxide concentration since 1958 in the atmosphere. So you can see clear trend. This is direct measurements in the atmosphere. Huge increase in carbon dioxide emissions since 58. This is a summary map of some research that was done very recently in 2017, and it found that we've destroyed 10% of the Earth's wilderness in 25 years. So in this map, the green areas are wilderness and the red areas are the portion of wilderness that we've destroyed. These are just a few snapshots. There's a lot more of things that we could go into, just like we could go into a lot more of the resources that the market's really good at managing. But the point here is that markets are very good at managing certain things, but they're very, very bad at managing things with non-market value. So like that map of nature. If the destruction of nature isn't reflected in market prices, it's very hard to manage. We'll talk about externalities in a little bit, but basically when the source of something is difficult to identify, it's very hard for the market to manage that. This is really important. Things that may happen in the future or don't provide quick feedback. So climate change is a really good example of this, because a lot of the impacts of what we're doing today impact things that are going to happen in the future. It's really, really difficult for the market to put a proper price on that. Or something that doesn't have a quick feedback. Let's say we're depleting water sources, but it's not short right now, but we're sort of laying this foundation where it's going to be short in the future. Again, it's really difficult for the market to do that. It can do that. There's certain ways that it can happen, but by and large, it's not good at integrating those things. Okay, and so that's important. Markets are very good at certain things, not so good at certain things. And so the take home of this is that there are still debates today about the role of government versus free market in poverty reduction and other problems. If you just look at, read the news, watch the news, you'll see that there is a huge debate that still rages about this. Again, to be very clear, free markets work very, very well for a lot of resources. And again, free markets are very important. There's really no debate that free markets have contributed mightily to where you are today. The fact that, in the US you can expect to live around 80 years and so forth. So it's very important. However, keep in mind that it's not good at managing irreplaceable resources or accounting for things that don't really have a price, like things with non-market value, like future impacts, like nature, and so forth. And also just to think about, can we even value it? So how markets are really good at managing things that have market value, but how do you value things like people, nature, democracy? I mean, is there really a price behind that? Okay, so these are some important things to think about. And I just want to throw out the last thing here. This is just an FYI. You don't really need to know this. But if you remember the financial collapse in 2008, Alan Greenspan, who was a very, very strong advocate of free markets, and he was the chairman of the Fed at the time, and he admitted basically, this is a direct quote from him, he said, "I made a mistake in presuming that self-interests of organizations, specifically banks and others, were such that they were best capable of protecting their own shareholders and their equity in firms." So he's basically saying, oops, my bad. Maybe the government should have regulated markets. And this is a guy that was very strong advocate of just letting banks and the market do its thing. And so there are instances where even people that are very strong advocates of free markets recognize that maybe they're not so good. Okay, that's it.